Ibrahim Traoré is a symbol, and a symbol is part of the system. So what young people must realize that success is not an individual achievement. You achieve because you are part of a team. The current situation in Burkina Faso must be understood in the context of history. And that history, in my view, starts from 1983 with the emergence of Thomas Sankara. When Thomas Sankara took power in what was then Upper Volta, he changed the name of the country to Burkina Faso, the land of the upright men. That was seen as a revolution, and many things happened under the leadership of Thomas Sankara until he was eliminated in 1987. We now know that one of the people who participated was a close compatriot who became the president, Blaise Compaoré, and that is in the public domain. That short stint was so dramatic in the lives of the people of Burkina Faso and in Africa that Thomas Sankara became an icon. And the rise of Ibrahim Traoré is almost seen as a reincarnation of Thomas Sankara and his revolutionary fervor. And that is why he has become a poster boy for the new Africa. But let us understand how it came about. In the year 2022, in the month of January, the government of Roch Marc Christian Kabore was overthrown in January. And part of the accusation against the Kabore administration was that they had failed to eliminate the Islamic insurgency in the northern part of Burkina Faso. But Kabore did not stay in power for too long. In the month of September, in fact, in the month of September, the administration that had overthrown Kabore in January, that was the administration of Paul Henry Sandaogo Damiba. That is the administration that overthrew Kabore. He himself was to be overthrown in the month of September, the year 2022, by Ibrahim Traoré and his colleagues. And the reason why I think Traoré then very quickly became the poster boy was because of the decisions that he made to sever ties with France. His language was that we had remained a neo-colonial state for too long. Re-echoing what Thomas Sankara had said, his language was that we must have our own resources. If it is our uranium, let us use our uranium. If it is feeding ourselves, let us engage in agriculture that is going to feed our people. Let us ensure that we, the Burkinabe, are doing things that are in the interest of the Burkinabe and therefore in the larger interest of the continent of Africa. And it also came at a time when there is general disillusionment with the ballot. Africans had been persuaded, particularly after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, that this thing called democracy as defined by the West was the alpha and omega of good governance. You had to have multi-party politics, you had to have periodic elections, and people went to the ballot. In many cases, the ballot was not very useful because the vote was stolen. And if it was not stolen, the people who emerged from the ballot did not do anything for the people. So the people wanted drama, the people wanted change, the people wanted sound rhetoric, the people wanted Pan-African rhetoric. And in many ways, Ibrahim Traoré, as it stands now, represents that. But remember, his administration has only been in power for 3 years. In the life of a nation, that is a very short time. And one may say the beginning is good, but the journey is still long. Once again, when one continues that conversation, I want us to remember that in the year 2014, in Malabo, in Equatorial Guinea, African heads of states and government came up with the Malabo Protocol that outlawed unconstitutional changes of power. And in that context, unconstitutional changes of power had to be defined, and they were defined under the Malabo Declaration of the year 2022, where the African heads of state not only reiterated what had been said in 2014, but also formed the African Court on Human and People's Rights and said unconstitutional change of power means this: acquiring power by a coup d'etat, 2, refusing to hand over power when you have lost an election, and 3, tampering with constitutional processes to extend one's life in office. So to the outside world, to your typical African leader, including the African Union, the rise to power of Ibrahim Traoré is seen as unconstitutional change of power and rise to power. And that is why Burkina Faso, alongside Niger and Mali, have been suspended from the activities of the African Union. Why then are the people of Africa celebrating those who have acquired power in what other African leaders are calling unconstitutional change of power? Why is it that people who are described by the Western media and by African media as leading military juntas have become so unpopular? The reason is not far to seek. They have seen the so-called democratically elected leaders in different parts of Africa. They are corrupt. Some of them are murderous. And some of them are plain anti-people because they don't do that which is in the interest of the people. The people of Africa have seen how people who are in power retain and extend their stay in power for unnecessarily long when they are delivering nothing. And Ibrahim Traoré's administration presents a hope, presents in the view of particularly young Africans a light at the end of the tunnel. And what is that light saying? That light is saying, and it can be heard through the echo chambers, saying, you the colonizers, you the French, who in 1958 pretended to hand over political power, we no longer want to be with you. We no longer want to be your latter-day slaves. Traoré is being heard as saying that. Traoré is being heard as saying, you the neo-colonizers who have given us the short hand of the stick, you reap where you have not sown. You take our uranium, you take our resources, you take our minerals, and you give us a pittance. You are not going to do it anymore. You, the colonizers who handed over to us systems of governance that cannot work, including electoral commissions, including printing ballots in your own countries, including printing paper currency in your own countries, we will not allow you. He is saying that. You, the colonizers who, when we want to liberate ourselves, you create insurgency, you sow seeds of discord within our ranks, we are not going to allow you to do that. You, the African Union, who ought to be protecting us as Africans, you ECOWAS, who ought to be protecting us as Africans, you too appear to be mere lapdogs of the international order, particularly the West. To the extent that he is saying that, he is striking the right chords of a dissatisfied, disillusioned people in the continent of Africa, and their wish and desire is that there is a new dawn. A new dawn where governance will be different. A new dawn where governance will be people-centered. A new dawn where the umbilical cord between the colonizer and the free peoples will be severed. That is what, in the minds of many, Ibrahim Traoré represents. And that is his appeal. Remember, throughout history, people, and this is human, always want symbols of what they are fighting about. In the struggle for independence, if you look at other nations, in Ghana it was Nkrumah, in Tanzania it was Nyerere, in Zambia it was Kaunda, in Malawi it was Banda, in Mozambique it was Machel, Angola it was Neto. But this is now big because Traoré has come at a time when there is what I call African Renaissance, and people want things that are pan-African to defy what happened in Berlin in 1884 and 1885. That is what is happening. He is that symbol. You know, in history, people emerge, or leadership emerges that is defined by environment. Upper Volta had been one of the French colonies that was seen to be wedded to the Paris government, almost in the class of La Côte d'Ivoire or Senegal at one time. When Thomas Sankara came and said, we've got to recognize ourselves, and started by changing the name of the country, that was unprecedented. It was only in Ghana that Nkrumah had changed the name of Gold Coast to Ghana. This was new, this was fresh. And Thomas Sankara then was seen in that mold. A servant leader who says, I do not want the trappings of power. I do not want long motorcades. I do not want security that is a mere display of power. I want to serve the people. I don't want to ride in Mercedes-Benz or Bentley or Cadillac. I want something that is functional, something that moves. And when Thomas Sankara appears in 1987 at the OAU meeting in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and calls for our refusal to pay debts, he created a revolutionary fervor in Burkina Faso. And Traoré is in that tradition. He was young then, but the stories must have been told to him of Thomas Sankara. And remember, they come out of the same environment, the military environment. They may have been trained after the style of the French, but sometimes you've got to swim in the oceans of the enemy in order to know who they are. So he grew in that environment, and when therefore he comes and says, we are leading, when he comes and says, we are not going to have the trappings of power to prevent us from working for the people, when he comes and says, my salary is not going to be increased, when he comes and says, I'm not going to be summoned to appear in European capitals, when he comes and says that the IMF and the World Bank are not going to dictate to us what to do, when he comes and says that the mineral companies of the West are not going to tell us what to do, we are going to choose our own friends in the international arena, he is speaking for many people in the continent of Africa. And that is why, for the moment, he remains in the minds and hearts of many people. And the prayer of many is that he does not change. because power has its own way of changing and corrupting people. The prayer of many who are watching him is that he remains on course, that he remains faithful to the agenda, that he remains faithful to his declared position that he is a people's servant, that he is a midwife to deliver for the people of Burkina Faso and to ensure that the quality of their lives is improved. For the moment, he is receiving the best judgment that a leader can expect. He can do no wrong in the minds of many. And the media and social media is populated with a lot of artificial intelligence things which are attributed to him. And they are all positive. That is a statement of the hunger that Africans have for positive messaging. It gives hope. It tells them that it can be done and that it must be done. So in the same way, for those who read the Bible, as Moses stood before his people and said, I'm going to part the Red Seas, Traoré is expected to part Red Seas, almost to summon manna from heaven, almost to cause pillars of fire to stand between them and the neo-colonizers. The expectations are great. The situation as it is in the Sahel region must be understood at two levels. Level number one is that it has brought forth a new generation of leaders. And remember, it started in the year 2021 with the coup d'etat in Mali, when Atimi Goita overthrew the administration of Ndao. When he did that, the rebellion started, and immediately after that, there was the Burkina Faso coup in 2022, and immediately after that, in 2023, there was the coup in Niger. And immediately after that, you saw that they were expelled, and the three countries have moved out of the economic community of West African states and created their own one in the Sahel. And remember that that region is also infested by insurgencies who we think are also manufactured by the former colonizer France. Remember that that region has said we are having one currency. Remember they've said that we are allowing free movement of people. Remember that they are removing tariff and non-tariff barriers. Remember that the French have also ensured that their kin and kith in the West are hostile to those administrations and, of course, by extension, hostile to Burkina Faso. Remember that they were exploiting the uranium. Remember they were exploiting their minerals. Remember that they saw these as satellite states, and it is for that reason why Russia became attractive as a trusted ally. And many in the West sometimes don't understand why Russia is attractive as an alternative to the Western countries. The history is long, but let us cut it short. Russia was not a colonizer. Despite attempts by some Western historians to say that they attempted to colonize in Africa, they did not. So there is no colony of Russia. And even when the Soviet Union existed prior to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, and we use the word Russia as if it was the same as the Soviet Union. At least that is what happened in many parts of Africa. And what did they do? They were seen in the early days to be positive supporters of African initiatives. In Egypt, during the administration of Gamal Abdel Nasser, when the West had refused to build the Aswan High Dam, it is the Russians who came. In Ghana, the Russians were friendly to Kwame Nkrumah, of course, then a Soviet Union. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, when the UN had refused and or failed to come in aid of Patrice Emery Lumumba, it is the Russians who are called, and then Lumumba was called a communist. So the Russians were also present in Angola to support NATO. They were present in Mozambique to support Mondlane and Machel. They were present in Zimbabwe to support Nkomo and Mugabe. They were present to support the African National Congress in South Africa. Their presence in Africa has been seen as positive. And they have been seen as a friend who does not want to humiliate and dominate. They may have their interest in having minerals, they may have their interest, as indeed every country does, but they are people you can call friends, not fair weather friends. And it is in that context that then they become a natural choice for two reasons. One, historical. Secondly, because they have the military wherewithal. Remember that this world is the law of the jungle. And if you have a friend who is feared by your enemy, then that does guarantee your security. And it's that context, therefore, that you see Russia have become, in many ways, the protectors of this administration at the request of the administration. Because if it were not so, history tells us that you can be eliminated. And we have had many rumors of attempts at the life of Ibrahim Traoré. And these colonizers, they don't do so directly. They use your very own. They create fifth columnists within your very own system. And if you had any doubt, how did they eliminate Thomas, Isidore, Noel, Sankara? Through the people that he thought were his friends. In Kiswahili we say, kikulacho kingoni mwako. That which bites you is inside the clothes that you wear. And that is why you need friends who will stand by you, come rain or shine. And for the moment, the Russians have demonstrated that they are such friends. When one talks about friendship, particularly in this harsh world where in truth it can be said there is a new scramble for Africa, in this harsh world where the European powers, former colonizers, are losing their territory and influence one by one, in this harsh world where the Western countries, the conceptual West, believe that they are losing their territories to Russia and China, to be a friend of Russia is to invite enemies from the West. And that is why you see, using even African institutions, they threaten Burkina Faso, they threaten Mali, they threaten Niger. Using different methods, they try to ensure that they drain water out of your pond so that you cannot survive. So in the short to medium term, it is going to be a difficult time. Difficult because they'll try to choke you. They'll try to ensure that they create an environment where your people rise up against you. They'll try to ensure that there is dissatisfaction. So going forward, what I would myself suggest is that the engagement be structured and be beyond human beings. Human beings can only exist for so long. But in order to ensure that friendship is guaranteed, the friendship between Burkina Faso and Russia must look beyond Traoré and beyond Putin. And that can be done by ensuring that the engagements are of mutual strategic interest for the countries, so that if it is in agriculture, if it is in the mining sector, if it is in tourism, if it is military, then those structures are put in place, and 100 years from today, holding all factors constant, they can survive those who entered into them as agreements. You know, when Traoré came to power, and let us retrace the history again, that he came to power after Compaoré had been removed and had sought asylum outside of the country, I think in La Côte d'Ivoire. He came to power after Jean-Marc Christian Kabore's administration had been taken away. He came to power after Damiba had been taken away. And when he came and he appeared to be relieving and reviving what I call the Sankaraist philosophy, he became an immediate enemy of Paris, led by Macron. And Macron, you see, has carried himself almost as the latter-day Napoleon Bonaparte. To the extent that he has done so, anybody who is not towing the line, Macron, I think, sees himself, and this is subject to debate, not only as Napoleon Bonaparte, but also as Charles de Gaulle. And in that regard, he believes that the territories which were colonized by them must behave. Remember in 1958, after the yes-no vote, in which case only Sékou Touré of Guinea voted no, they used to refer to former French colonies as territoire de haute mer. These are our foreign territories in the distant land. So when you break loose, as Burkina did, says, what is happening here? Who do they think they are? Do they think they can withstand France? So it is personal anger. It is ego that has been hurt, and that can be dangerous. Hence, the reaction that you see from Paris. In other words, from the standpoint of Paris, Ibrahim Traoré and his compatriots are giving a bad example to otherwise good boys and girls. When you look at Traoré and Burkina Faso now, I think there are four categories of people when you look at how they are dealing with the Traoré. There is category number one of leaders who are wedded to their colonizers, who think, oh, this young man, we've seen many like him, he's just a flash in the pan, he'll come and go. That is category number one. And I'm sure they tell their masters in the West, we have seen many, didn't we see Sankara? Didn't we see Lumumba? Didn't we see Nkrumah? Didn't we see Machel? Category number one. Category number two are those who are saying, I wish it was me who was getting this kind of adulation. What could I have done in order to ensure that my name is emblazoned on every other media? Those are actuated by ego and malice and envy and jealousy. That is another category of African leaders. The other category of African leaders are those who fear. They fear that what this young man and his compatriots are doing is setting a bad example, and I must now look very keenly at what my young men and women in the army are doing. They can't sleep because they fear that they themselves can meet the fate of those who are removed by Traoré. So they fear in that regard. Then there is the fourth positive category. They are few and far between. They are the ones who say, yes, these things we call unconstitutional changes of power, this is not unconstitutional change of power. This is rebellion, and not just rebellion. This is revolution. And they are saying, let us not ostracize these young men and women. They actually represent a new generation of Africans who are impatient, who feel let down. Let us support them. One of them who is emerging in that category is my very good friend, John Dramani Mahama of Ghana, who upon returning to power in Ghana told the ECOWAS leaders, we must engage the Sahelians. And he's been to Ouagadougou, he's been to Bamako, he's been to Niamey. They are saying that this situation is a clarion call to the entire continent of Africa, that if we don't change for the better, then we will be eliminated. So when you look at the situation in Burkina Faso, those are the four forces that are operating within the African continent. Then there is a fifth force from outside of the continent. This is France. These young people are making us to lose our spheres of influence. They think they are going to make something to work in Burkina Faso. We will not allow it. What we are going to do is to cause and support insurgency, so that if there is no total breakdown of law and order in those countries, then there will be a civil war. And I can tell you, they are doing everything in their power, covertly and overtly, to undermine those administrations. And I have no doubt in my mind that on a daily basis, they have individuals in their intelligence community asking, how can we eliminate him? Can we eliminate him by poisoning his toothpaste like we tried before with other people? What do we use? On a daily basis, they are planning. In 1965, Nkrumah gave an iconic speech. He said that it is the duty of the military to support the government in power and the duty of the military not to be involved in politics. But if it becomes necessary for the military to get involved in politics, it should only be for a short time as justified by necessity, and then they must go back to their military duties. In other words, even the Osagie for Kwame Nkrumah himself, who unfortunately ended up being a victim of a military coup, did appreciate that there may be circumstances in which it can become necessary. In Africa, why is it becoming necessary? It is becoming necessary because those who are in office have perfected the art of sustaining themselves in power by manipulating the ballot. You know, there are 55 African countries, 54 recognized internationally. 40 of those countries print their ballots outside of the continent of Africa. And there is evidence in the cases of some of these countries that ballots are actually pre-marked in favor of certain candidates. So you can wake up all you want very early in the morning. But as was said by one leader many years ago, it is not those who vote that matter, but those who count the votes. So today, you walk across Africa and you hear young people saying, what is the purpose of voting anyway? The result is predetermined. And these individuals, once they get into power, what is their greatest claim to fame? They are thieves, they are liars, they are murderers. So people are becoming helpless. And it is in this context when an enlightened or a group of enlightened individuals in the armed forces then seize power through the barrel of the gun, then they get the people's support, because the people say, we don't like these individuals and therefore we are not going to listen to these individuals who say that power has been seized unconstitutionally. We are going to argue that the end justifies the means. And this is why, therefore, coups are becoming something that are celebrated. That is why there were people dancing in the streets of Niamey. That is why there were people dancing in the streets of Bamako. That's why there were people dancing in the streets of Libreville. That is why there were people dancing in the streets of Ouagadougou. And I'm sure there are many more in different African countries waiting to dance and asking themselves, when will an enlightened group of men and women emerge in our country to save us from the clutches of these megalomaniacs who have succeeded in manipulating the ballot. Burkina Faso has tried to achieve many things, but I also want us to contextualize Burkina Faso. The Burkina Faso economy is a small economy. Its GDP at very best is just slightly over 20 billion United States dollars. That is a small economy. But as the saying goes, you cut your coat according to your cloth. And what the administration of Traoré has tried to do is, number one, to restore people's confidence and pride and esteem. That must never be forgotten, that people simply want to live free. They don't want to feel that they are enslaved or they are slaves of anybody. I think that has been done, giving meaning to the name of the country, the Burkina Faso, the land of the upright man. Number two, they have identified key areas that touch society. And therefore you see very deliberate focus on agriculture. Deliberate focus, not that they want to mechanize their agriculture in a dramatic way, but ensuring that household situation is proper, that people can have food and grow food that will feed themselves. That, I think, we see that there is quite some investment in agriculture, and attempts actually are being made to even mechanize agriculture to the extent that it is necessary so that they do not rely on importation from food. That is also happening. The third thing is education, because people recognize that education is an important investment for younger people, and you can see that there's attempts, even in the face of very limited budgets, attempts to ensure that schools are equipped and schools are being managed in a manner that is responsive to the realities of the day, including technology and artificial intelligence. Another area that they have done very well is with a view to taking control of their natural resources. You will know that many of the resources, particularly in the mining sector, for which Burkina Faso is very famous, was under the control of many companies which were based either in Canada, the United States of America, Australia, and of course France. They are saying all the minerals and all these must now be mined for the benefit of the people of Burkina Faso. And they are not saying we are not going to trade with the world. No. They are simply saying there must be trade that ensures that the income that is generated and or realized from the exploitation of our minerals is used for the benefit of the people of Burkina Faso. They have also entered into what I call very useful engagements, and I think there are ongoing negotiations, particularly with the Russian government, with a view to having energy. And I think that in itself is useful in terms of transferring technology, so that some of the seeds or rather the fruits of the seed that are being sown today will only germinate after a short while. And the other thing that I think they are trying to do is to ensure that they, as much as is possible, control their affairs. The decision to have a passport that is printed and covers the three Sahelian countries of Burkina, of Mali, and of course Niger is a good thing. Having a currency that is not pegged on France, CFA franc, I think it is a good thing. Having a military that is focused on the people's plight is important. In eliminating institutions which are simply parasitic upon the population is also a good thing. This is the era and the period of disruption. So what has happened is that a lot of things have been disrupted in the last 3 years, and now they are beginning to get into the era of consolidation. And that is where you now must recognize that you are part of the international community. And that is why Burkina Faso is now receiving very many visitors who are going to that. I know friends of mine from different parts of the world have been visiting Burkina Faso, and I and others actually will be visiting Burkina Faso in the month of October. And this is happening because they have also demonstrated that this could possibly be the beginning of true Pan-Africanism in practical terms. So a lot of things are happening there, and I think when you are doing well, if you allow me a football analogy, when you are moving with the ball towards the goal, the noise is useful to encourage you to hold the ball well in the knowledge that it is only when you score that you make us happy. So the ball is moving towards the goal, and those who are outside are cheering, and we want to see the ball at the back of the net. Then we will cheer even more. As I said, Ibrahim Traoré is a symbol, and a symbol is part of the system. So what young people must realize that success is not an individual achievement. You achieve because you are part of a team. You achieve because you are part of a chain, and a chain has many components. You achieve because you are focused. You achieve because you are courageous. You achieve because you love your country and you are selfless. You achieve because you don't have insatiable appetite for good things. You achieve because you are able to identify friends. You achieve because you have conquered yourself and you want to serve. Those are the positive lessons that young people must draw: discipline, courage, focus. Africa stands at crossroads. And when you are at crossroads, you choose which path you are going to follow. What is happening in Burkina Faso, and by extension in the Sahelian region to include Niger and Mali, is a good thing. A good thing because it is being demonstrated that young Africans can rise above the parapet of mediocrity and begin to shine light in the right direction. Our prayer and our hope is that the people will keep these leaders on a short leash, because good governance must always be underpinned and protected by eternal vigilance of the population, because power can corrupt, and all of us are capable of being corrupted by power. So we must always remind everybody who is in a position of leadership that you hold power in trust for us. And that is why we must remind Traoré, remind Atimi Goita, remind Shani that you are there, but you are merely the arrow's head. The arrow's head without the tail cannot move.